Right. Welcome, everybody. This is part 2, lecture 2 of the Lion King series. And this should be about an hour, but this is my favorite part of the movie, so I don't know how long it's going to be. So, the important part that goes on right here is that we have just experienced a death. This is the death of Mufasa. And like every good mythological storyteller would know, after every death, there needs to be a rebirth. Without a doubt. For every time that your parents die, or this is in movies, but you could even see this in your own life. Whenever there is a death of the old person, the old part of you, you can't just leave yourself with nothing. Like imagine you become a kid, right? And you grow up and you finally say, you know what, I'm going to be an adult. And you're essentially saying that the kid part of you is going to die. But then there's got to be some new part of you, right? Then you got to turn into a completely new person, right? And that's the whole reason why there are all these theories, all these religious theories about why there is after death some sort of rebirth. Jesus had the resurrection. You have the what is it? Is it the Taoists? Is it Buddha? The people who believe that we constantly are being reborn into new and better lives, because the purpose is for every death there needs to be a rebirth. So this is the point where Simba needs to experience his rebirth. No matter what, now that this part of him has died, now that Mufasa has died, he needs to experience some sort of rebirth. So now you have Scar coming along, and he essentially tells him, Simba, this is all your fault. If you never got into this situation, if you never, were stuck in the ravine, your dad never would have died. So essentially he's putting the blame all on him. And Simba's at this point, he's still dependent, right? So since his whole life he's been dependent on his dad. You think he's going to accept independence right away? Obviously not. He's going to be looking for something else to depend on, right? So the first thing that he does after he realizes his father's death is he calls for help. And that's really what he's doing. He's looking for some sort of, something to rely on. And that's the sad part, right? Now you have this tyrannical, we could say this tyrannical father, right? The new emerging father that's coming on, which is Scar, and he's not going to be giving him the right answers, even though Simba is still going to depend on him. So what he goes to him and he tells him, run away, Simba, and never return. Well, that's the whole point, right? So there has to be some sort of rebirth. There has to be something that happens to Simba, and there has to be something that shapes his personality. And as he's taking his path of, I'm gonna rise out of this occasion. I'm gonna take this as a challenge and develop my independence. Or he's gonna say, I'm gonna run away from my problems. He has this person that he trusts telling him, run away from your problems. Don't even think about it. Run away and never return. Descend into this new part of you that doesn't confront your problems and doesn't accept the reality of your father's death. So this is exactly, I like to take this as an analogy or a metaphor for the tyrannical aspect of our society, right? If you think about it, right, society will, let's say you experience some sort of problem, right? So I've started to experience this in my own life, right? Like I'll encounter some sort of problem, and the first thing that our brain is designed to do when we experience a problem is think about it, right? So imagine you have all these things going on in your head, and your brain is evolved to come to a solution. Okay, you know what? Let's sort this all out. Let's figure it out. But what society is telling you, or let's say our culture is telling you, no. Here's a phone, here's a TV, here's some distraction, and let's do anything possible to make sure that you are not doing it. So what is the first thing that we experience today that, whenever we feel some sort of problem, we go on our phones, Right, that's the first thing. We go on our phones, we go on social media, we distract ourselves. And this is running away from our problems. Instead of thinking about it and confronting our problems like a real hero would do, our society incentivizes, the Scar part of our society is incentivizing us to go and run away from our problems. And I find this to be incredibly powerful within our own psyche as just a metaphor. So anyways, after this you have Scar comes in and he tells all of his hyenas to go and kill him. Because obviously, right, like if you have a tyrannical aspect, you don't want, he wants to be king, right? If he wants to be king, he wants Simba to die. So this is a really important part of, the hero's journey, right? So now what ends up happening is Simba, no matter what, he still needs to die and be reborn, right? So what he does is he's running away from these hyenas. He sees that they're about to take him down, and what he does is he jumps off of the ravine. He jumps off of Pride Rock. So now he's officially jumped off of Pride Rock, and as you could tell, this is a giant jump. This is a leap of faith, and there is no security here. He is jumping from a certain world of Pride Rock, the secure place where he was raised, and he's jumping into chaos. Not only is he jumping into the place that could potentially kill him, right, falling off of this rock, but he's jumping out of the certain life that Pride Rock has given him. And you could tell, because I think this is some of the most incredible imagery ever, right? When he was born, there was a sunrise, and that's what we talked about before. And obviously that was the metaphor for his birth, right? So obviously it symbolizes, okay, now he's going to be born. But now, as he's jumping off, you can see there's a sunset, and this is the symbolism of death, right? Now he is dying. The old part of him is dying, and he is now taking this leap of faith into a new life where he has to be reborn. But this is the death of the hero. This is the death of the hero inside of Simba, and you'll see why later. So, yep, there you go, death of hero, right? So what ends up happening is now he must cross this terrain of thorns, and that's the same imagery, right? You must cross this terrible, terrible death. You must cross this terrible, terrible ravine to be able to get and move on to your new life. So now, I think one of the best metaphors that exists inside of a story, and I really like the fact that you have Simba being in two separate places, because what you could track is you look at Pride Rock, and you could see it as an externalization, as a visual for how Simba is actually doing on his inside. And you could see that as we play it out. So before, Pride Rock is in harmony, and at the same time Simba is also in harmony. It's good, right? There's Mufasa, who's the good king, and he's leading, and everything's in harmony. Now you have Scar coming in, and he's the one who takes over Pride Rock. And now Pride Rock, obviously, now you have the hyenas in the background, right? They're the ones who are going to take over, and Scar's going to become king. And now you have, at the same time, Simba is running away from himself. He's running away from his feelings, right? And you could see Pride Rock, if it's an image of himself, right? If it's an image of how he's feeling on the internal, that's exactly how he's feeling. Pride Rock is a perfect symbolism for it. So Pride Rock is the place where Simba is it's a symbol of his internal state, and his internal state is being taken over by Scar. It's being taken over by this feeling of running away from your problems. So right now you have the replacement. This is the replacement of the good order, the harmony that existed inside of Simba's self, and it's the place of chaos, right? So you can see that Scar takes over, and here's a picture. You have Pride Rock in the background on the left. And it's the same moon. It was a crescent moon when Scar was in there before, but there's also a crescent moon, which I find really interesting. But another part that's super interesting, and it's okay. So what you could see here is you have the monkey Rafiki on the right, and he was present. He shows up multiple times throughout this process, and he shows up in select times. So we could see Rafiki as the image of the self. And when we say self, it's the inner core of what Simba really is. You know, when Simba really goes through those personal transformations of, okay, you know what, I kind of understand where I am, and, you know, this is how I feel on the inside. So Rafiki is the image for himself. You know, he's always there, but sometimes Simba's really in touch with himself, and sometimes Simba's not really in touch with himself. So you have Rafiki in the beginning of the movie, he holds up Simba, and what he's really saying is, okay, this is the emergence of the self, this is the birth of the hero. Now, at the death of Simba's self, or at the death of Simba's in touch with himself, because he's leaving Pride Rock, and he's running away from his feelings, so he's moving away from his image of himself because he's not confronting those feelings. You have Rafiki, who's there, and that's important, right? So Rafiki's sitting there and he's just shaking his head because he realizes that Simba is moving away from himself. And there's actually Carl Jung, actually, he believed that a circle is such a powerful imagery. And I like to use the circle as a way of showing Simba and how in touch with himself he really is. So if you could imagine, you know, this sort of intersection point right at the middle, that is Simba being in the center of his own existence, being in touch with himself and fully at the center of his own existence. So right now, Simba, because he has left himself, since he has decided not to confront his feelings, he is now completely outside of himself, right? He's rejecting himself. He is running away from his home, and he's running away from his internal feelings, and that is where Simba is really at right now. So the next part of Simba's journey, right, is that he now has to go into chaos. He just left order. He just left the place where he was dependent on somebody, and now he's not dependent on anybody, right? He's running away and he's right by himself, and that's the image of the desert, right? On almost every, I think that was the image in biblical scriptures where Moses had to cross over the desert, right? And in that imagery, right, you have the desert is something that's barren, it's dry, and it's so difficult to maneuver, right? There's so much chaos, there's no food, right? So the desert's really an imagery of Simba just going through an absolute chaos where there's nothing around him and he has no idea what to do because everything is so barren and dry. So right now, he actually gets picked up by Pumbaa and Timon, right? Like these two characters, and they're the ones who bring him from a sort of chaos to a sort of order, right? So they bring him under these trees, and they're the ones who give him water, right? So this is what you could sort of see is the birth of the new Simba, right? Because now, since he's moving from a chaotic place to an orderly place, right? To these friends that are giving him attention and that are also giving him, you know, they're giving him a new life. This is sort of the birth of the new hero, right? Or the new Simba. I wouldn't even call him a hero, right? So you could see this is the philosophy of Mufasa is very different from the philosophy of Timon. Timon says, when the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on the world, right? And this is the establishment of the rebirth of Simba, right? So Simba not only did his father die, not only is he leaving Pride Rock, but his emotions are changing, right? His philosophies are changing. And now he starts to accept this sort of, you know, it's called Hakuna Matata, right? So he's accepting this mindset of, you know what, never mind, I'm not going to accept, I'm going to kill off this mindset that I had previously, which was, you know, you encounter problems in the world, no, if you face them, you confront them. But he's now going to he's going to kill off that part of himself, and there's going to be a rebirth of a new idea inside of himself, which is when the world turns their back on you, you turn your back on the world. And the symbolism of death and rebirth is something that is present in our lives every day, all the time. Anytime you have an idea, a type of idea that let's say, runs your life. So if you believe, let's say, racism is a great example, right? So if you have a racist idea and you have that structure that's inside of you, and to be able to change your mind, it doesn't require just a simple changing of idea. What it really is, it's the death of the old person of you which had that idea, and to emerge out of that into a new person which embraces a new identity and has a new idea, right? So you essentially have to kill off that part of yourself and then reemerge and be reborn as a completely new person with a slightly different idea. And these deaths and rebirths happen constantly. So this is what's happening in Simba. His philosophies are changing, and actually, I think that was interesting. They went from a philosophy Mufasa, who was very confrontational, but now Timon and Pumbaa have this problem-free philosophy, right? That's part of Hakuna Matata. And you could tell this is part of the rebirth of Simba, because actually what they're doing, you could see what Timon is doing. Timon? Yeah, Timon. What he's doing is he's actually filing Simba's claws, right? So essentially he's declawing Simba. He's turning him into someone who's able to confront his problems, to someone who literally can't, because he's taking away his claws, right? So this is sort of turning him into someone who confronts problems, to someone who's just more laid back and doesn't really have that lion instinct. And what I'm actually going to do in this lecture, right, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the 5 stages of addiction, because what Simba actually does throughout this process is he starts to get addicted to this lifestyle, right? It's we could say it's not a very good lifestyle, just avoiding all the problems in the world and just embracing just pure pleasure and not worrying about anything, not having any sort of responsibilities. And you'll see that play out throughout the movie. And he starts to get somewhat addicted, but he never actually takes that full path. So the first step in this 5 stages of addiction is initiation, right? So this is the point where we're going to take this analogy in terms of somebody who gets addicted to alcohol, right? So the first step of addiction is someone who gets handed some alcohol, and they drink it, right? And they start to like it, right? And this is exactly what happens to Simba, right? He starts to accept this lifestyle and he starts to like it, right? So that's just the first step. Obviously, there could be many deviations from there. It's not the true path to addiction, right? It's not everybody who does that becomes addicted, but this is the first step of someone who does become addicted. So the next step in this process is experimentation, right? So actually, they kind of go hand in hand, right? So the first step of initiation is someone who, gives him the alcohol, and then this is where he starts trying. He starts, sort of testing it out. And you could see that in him testing out these bugs, right? So he's a lion, right? Think about the symbolism behind this. He's a lion who has been eating, antelope, deer, right? Like all these meats that lions would eat. And now he's shifting to a lifestyle where he's eating bugs, right? So why would a lion be eating bugs? Why would a lion whose system is designed for hardy meats, the thing that he's actually meant to eat, and he's going to be doing this thing that's completely unrelated, right? Like this isn't part of Simba's journey, right? This isn't part of Simba's nature. But he ends up eating the bugs, and he enjoys the bugs, right? He enjoys not having to, work for his meat. And then you could so then we end up going back to Scar, and you could see that he locks up. First of all, it's very dark, very gloomy, right? And the next thing that he does is you could see that the bird in the right is actually it's locked up, right? And before, right, his name was, man, I'm terrible with names. Zazu, right? Zazu was the symbol for the freedom of information, right? How the king had all the information and he knew everything that was going on. And that's a good king, right? You want a king who is fully aware of himself, you could say, right? Like Mufasa was fully aware of himself, besides the shadows, and that was his major flaw. But he was fully aware of everything in his kingdom. Now, and you could say also Simba was fully aware of himself, right? If Pride Rock is a symbol for Simba, then Simba was fully aware of himself. But now that Zazu is locked up, now Scar doesn't know anything about his kingdom, and Simba is completely trapped because he's not fully aware of himself. So then what ends up happening is Zazu says the name Mufasa. He says, Mufasa was a better king, or something of that sort. And Scar gets aggressive, right? Because not only is Scar, he doesn't want to hear what's going on inside of his kingdom, he also doesn't want to hear his weaknesses. And that's another part of the tyrannical king. The tyrannical king not only has such an ego that they don't want to hear about anything else, but they want to surround themselves by yes men, right? And that's what Scar is, right? He only wants to hear people. He doesn't want to feel inferior. And part of that is he wants to surround himself by people who are just, who only support him, who won't do anything to lessen his, power. And then we go back to Simba, and right, Simba's at the point where, if you look at his face, right, his face just looks like he's dazed, right? If you'd imagine a picture of a hero, I can't imagine that a hero would look like that, right? He's just sort of immersed in the pleasure of the moment. And now he's reached the point of regular use, right? So now he's constantly immersed in this sort of pleasure-like mindset. And now he's belching, right? He's burping, right? And you don't really think, imagine any hero, imagine like Superman burping. Right, like it's not part of that character trait because well, I guess I don't know, right? Like why wouldn't we want to see a hero burping? I guess it's just because that means he's overindulged. Yeah, like that means he's sort of overindulged in all the food that he's having, right? Like that's what they say right there. They're like, I'm stuffed, right? Like why would a hero overindulge? They have more important things to worry about than food. So he's sort of burping, right? He seems a little irresponsible. This is at the point where he's at regular use. And then what ends up happening is they start talking about the stars, right? And they're pretty. That goes back to the message that Mufasa says, right? So they're all talking about the stars, and Timon, he's really a symbol for ego, right? Like he's so egotistical. You could tell throughout the movie, like they really make sure to prove that he's egotistical, and you could tell because Simba is literally talking about how I believe that this is what the stars represent, all the great kings of the past, right? That's exactly what Mufasa told him. And Timon calls them fireflies, right? And obviously we could say that that's wrong, but he's so sure that they're fireflies. And whenever Simba comes in and says, you know what, maybe they're kings of the past, Timon comes in and says, what mook made that up, huh? Right? Like what mook, I guess, dumb person, right? Like made that up, and that sort of says, he's so sure of his answer that it really doesn't make sense for it to be the kings of the past. And that's really the problem, right? If he's surrounding himself by someone that's so egotistical, then he never actually puts anybody above himself, because the whole purpose of the ego is that it's so rational that why would anyone want to care about anyone other than yourself, right? Like, isn't the first rule of anything self-preservation, right? Because, what's the point of caring about anything other than yourself if you don't have to, right? Like, you're the center of your own existence. And that's the only problem. The only problem with that is that, you never fully immerse yourself in the experience of helping others and doing the things that heroes do. Actually, Joseph Campbell said that a hero is someone who dedicates his life to helping, who dedicates himself to something greater than himself. right? And that's, like Timon would never do anything like that. So then what ends up happening is after this whole situation with Timon, Simba walks out and he looks up at the stars and he collapses to the ground, and he knows that his life is meaningless, right? Like, he has settled for a life that is secondary to the person that he truly is. He knows that the hero inside of him has died, right? And you could ask, I think this is a really important question. It's like, what's wrong with a life of just pleasure, right? What's wrong with a life where you're only doing something pleasurable and you're constantly living your life with something, the momentary highs of feeling elated, right? Like, there's no meaning, no responsibility. And the question is, like, what's so bad about that? And the only answer that I've sort of come up with that, because I find that to be a very engaging question, right? Like, why not just drink all the time and have fun with your friends and things like that? My only answer that I come up with that is that no matter what, and this was actually the answer that Jordan Peterson put together, and I find this absolutely magnificent. It's like, in your life, no matter what, you're going to be having so much suffering, right? Like, suffering is a necessary part of life, I guess, or just a necessary effect of life, right? Like, it always happens. And, people die. Our health isn't always perfect, right? Like, your parents are eventually going to die. Like, something like this is going to end up happening. And throughout this suffering, you're going to, when you're actually suffering, when you're going through anything, death, hard breakups, distrust, you're going to have a point where you can't distract yourself anymore. When you reach that point, the point where you physically can't distract yourself, where you can't run away from your problems through distractions, drinking, whatever, all these pleasurable items, you're going to have to confront it. And no matter how far you push it down, it's going to end up coming back to you. And that's the whole purpose of the shadows, right? Where Mufasa tells Simba, don't look into the shadows. We don't really worry about the shadows. But that's the thing that ends up killing him. That's the whole motif, right? It's like, okay, you could keep pushing down all this suffering, all this pain via pleasure. But the whole thing is, it's eventually going to come back up to you. And that's exactly what Simba's seeing here, right? So he has all of this pleasure that's going on in his life. He has all these friends. He's doing all the things that make him feel pleasureful. But at the same time, he has no meaning in his life. He can't escape the suffering that is going on inside of himself. And that's really what you see here. So Jordan Peterson offers, he says there needs to be some sort of meaning to justify the suffering. That's his whole pitch. He says, if you're not doing anything meaningful, then what is the reason to wake up the next morning? Right? Like, maybe it's to do the same thing that you did yesterday, to get the same amount of pleasure that you got yesterday, but there needs to be some sort of meaning that underlies that, because the pleasure goes up and then it goes down, right? You get drunk and then you come back down. You get high and you come back down. And eventually, you're going to have to confront that you're going to have to confront that suffering at some point. And the meaning is going to be a constant thing that pushes you past the suffering. And that's this whole thing. You need some meaning to justify the suffering. And if you only pursue pleasure, then there's nothing that is going to... then you're never going to be able to fully distract yourself from it. That was the whole point. So I think another point in this is that so then what ends up happening next, right, is now he's sort of confronting himself, right? So you see sort of, I guess the hero in him is sort of starting to reemerge, right? Because he's realizing that the self that he has created, the new person that he has created, is not the person that he is now. And what ends up happening is you need to have some sort of self-realization. And that's what happens when the self comes back, right? Like, you have an image of the self, and now he's back. So what he does, Rafiki, is I think he gets some wins, right? That Simba is alive. So he starts doing his little concoction, right? and he sees that Simba is alive, and look how happy he is, right? So what he did when his birth and his christening, right? He gave him the little whatever this was with the tangerines or whatever fruit this is, and he sort of birthed him, right? He gave him sort of like a ritual of birth, and that's essentially what he's doing here, right? So he has a painting of Simba, and he's giving him a second birth. He's giving him a rebirth, because there was the birth of the hero, then there was the rebirth of the not satisfactory Simba, and now we're having a rebirth, right? He realizes that the hero Simba is still inside of him, right? It never left him throughout all of this time, and that's what you see within this whole scene. And now you can tell that Simba, right, now that he has grown, he's getting closer to himself. He's not fully there, and he's not even close to there because he hasn't even done any action that makes him a hero, but he's getting closer to his true self, and that's what's really important. So now we pan by. The next scene is Timon and Pumbaa, right? Pumbaa he's just hanging out, and Pumbaa gets isolated, and you see this is Nala. Nala sees him and she's gonna hunt him down, right? She's ready to get food for her family. She has no idea where Pumbaa is. This is where actually they get introduced. So she chases him down, and you can tell, she's ready to eat him, and he is scared beyond belief. And then obviously you have it come down, and he gets stuck. She's about to eat him, and then what ends up happening is you have Simba come by, and he wants to protect his friend. So he has no idea that Nala's there, but he wants to go and protect his friend. So he starts getting into a fight with Simba. Simba gets into a fight with Nala, and she pins him down, right? Because she was pinning him down the whole time, and pins him down. And that's really I've been thinking about why she always pins him down, because obviously, right? You have in the lion societies, you have males are a lot stronger than females, right? Obviously, right? That's the whole point of having the male as king, because he's supposed to be the strong supporter of the entire female society. And if all the males weren't stronger, then all the females would take down Scar, but obviously they haven't, right? So you have Simba, who's physically stronger, but Nala still takes him down and pins him. And the question is why, right? And the reasoning that I've sort of come to this is, it's weird, but I think it makes sense. So essentially the whole purpose behind her pinning him down is essentially saying Simba might believe that he's sort of in control of his actions, but really he's not, right? Like really the whole time he's really being controlled by Nala. And you could see that towards the end of the movie, right, where she ends up getting him to be responsible for himself and make good decisions for himself. And you could see that maybe Simba's not fully in control of his decisions. Maybe he has to submit to this power of relationships and his responsibilities. And Nala is really a symbol for that. So you could see Nala confronts him right away, and she says, "You gotta come home." Right, and this is sort of the whole point of her controlling him. But you could tell at the look of his face, he is not in for it at all. Right, he really does not want to deal with it, because he's living a life of pleasure. Right, like why would you want to accept responsibility? It doesn't really make too much sense. And you can see it's very adolescent-like look. Right, like he doesn't look like Mufasa. Mufasa was the strong king, but the whole time Simba's just very, He looks like a teen who wants to naively rebel, and that's really the face that they got there, which I actually really like in the animation. So then you could tell of his persona, because she asked for them to be alone because she wants to talk to him, and he starts cracking jokes, right? And I find that to be so true in our society, right? Like that's the mindset. There's such a important conversation that needs to be had, and he just wants to avoid it. He just wants to start cracking jokes. In our society, I find that to be the case too. Whenever I'm having a conversation with somebody, and you could tell that they don't really want to have a deep conversation, but if you can't tell, I'm analyzing movies. I like to have deep conversations. So whenever someone likes to have a deep conversation, or whenever this conversation starts to get a little deep, somebody likes to crack a joke, or somebody wants to divert the conversation because, well, I guess who wants to confront those problems, right? Like, why would you want to confront the deeper problems when those aren't going to be the ones that make you happy? So, I mean, I guess it makes sense, but at the same time, that's the mindset of running away from the deeper problems, right? And obviously this isn't the case in all conversations, but a lot of people tend to have the conversations and they like to run away from their problems. And they like to run away from the deeper conversations because they don't really want to talk about it. And I find this is exactly what's happening with Simba. He doesn't want to talk about the deeper conversations, so he's going to make a joke. And Nala really just isn't down for it, right? She gives him that look. And that is a serious look. And she wants to confront the real problem. She wants to confront his responsibilities. She's really not interested in polite conversation. That's really the way it comes down to. And that's something like his call to adventure, right? Like she's calling him to come back and be the hero that he's really meant to be. And that's the real serious conversation that they have here. So then, the next part of it is they sort of need to. This is the part where they have the "Can You Feel the Love Tonight" song, right? This is the part where they reconnect, get together, and fall in love. So I find it interesting that every time that two people fall in love in a movie, it's always in the most beautiful place. And it's such a weird thing, but every time they do that, I saw this, it's the same exact imagery in Cars, for example. In Cars, they're in like this like normal place, like whatever, and they go directly, they leave the city, they leave the town, in that case, to go to this beautiful place with a waterfall. There's always a waterfall, and they're always, they just go and hang out. And I guess that's just the feeling of getting in touch with yourself, right? Like love is a beautiful thing, so they're gonna show that outwardly with the beautiful place that they're in. So then she gives him a lick, right? Like she begins to show him that he is more than just an adolescent, that she's more than just a boy, right? So she gives him a lick, and I find it interesting that they're about to I guess fall in love and do some sort of sexual behavior, and the whole purpose behind it is she initiates it, right? So she's the one who initiates it, when traditionally it's the man who initiates it. And you could tell that is such a powerful thing, because Simba's so shocked by it, right? Like he's beyond shocked by it. He has no idea that it's coming, and you could tell that he is still a boy, right? He's not ready for anything like that. And that's really a powerful thing. So there's a there's a whole belief. This was actually put forth by Joseph Campbell. It's like, why is that we don't really have any sort of, you think about women in a biological sense. There's a great point where you could tell where a girl becomes a woman, right? And that's the initiation of the menstrual cycle, right? Like that's the point where they could like have kids, right? But you look at, for boys, there's no way to really symbolically say like, okay, this is the time where a boy becomes a man, right? And that's why there's all these initiation ceremonies, right, within even tribal societies, and as well as our societies today, right? You look at the bar mitzvah, you look at the confirmation, and also you look at in fraternities, right, where they have the initiation process and the hazing, right, within college. And the entire purpose behind that is to initiate, to turn a boy into a man, right? It's to turn a immature individual into a more mature individual, and this is the point to really like symbolically say it. At this point, you have become a man, but he hasn't really had that, right? He's never really had this situation, so he's really still a boy. So at this point, his transition to a man is through the woman. It's through the woman who says, you know what, you need to accept your responsibilities, and you're not going to get the thing that you desire, obviously, like having kids, having sex with a woman, right? Like all these things, you're not going to have that unless you turn into a man. And you could tell that Timon and Pumbaa are just absolutely devastated by this, because now they know that they're losing a friend. And how are you supposed to compare with that, right? Like there's no way that they could compete with love and sex and all that it's absolutely impossible. So the next step in Simba's hero's journey is he actually needs to decide whether or not he's going to accept his hero's journey. And the first thing that happens is there's almost always a refusal of the call. Always, right? Because the whole purpose is, how are you supposed to go from a life of pleasure to a life of responsibility? And you could see that, right? Like, what is the logical reasoning for somebody to go from a life where they have all this pleasure, no responsibilities, nothing to do, nothing that would make them do work, right? Like nothing to care for, right? Like, isn't that such a beautiful life? Why would you have to do that? What is the logical reasoning behind that? And it's really not supposed to be logical, right? So you see Nala confronts him, and she says, you know what? So she goes up to him and she says, why should I do this? And she goes, it's your responsibility. There's no logical reasoning behind it. No, nothing like that. It's innate, right? Like we sort of understand that we need to carry responsibilities. As adults, we need to grow up. We need to be financially, accept our responsibilities. Financially, we need to accept our responsibilities in relationships, right? Like loyalty itself is a responsibility. It's, I'm responsible for this person, and I'm going to, no matter what no matter how the tides flow, right? No matter what this sort of, no matter what pleasures come my way, no matter, if betraying my friend would give me more pleasure in the moment. That's really not how it works, right? Our feelings of trust, our feelings of mutual bonds with the friendship, is a responsibility. You know what? We're gonna actually want to stand up for that friend. We're gonna want to do a situation where, maybe we want to get in there's the archetypal story of a friend getting into a fight, and the other friend comes in and helps them. It's like, why would you sacrifice yourself for your friend? It's like, that's what loyalty is. That's embracing your responsibility for your friend. But then again, it's absolutely illogical. Why would we get into a fight for our friend? It's just because it's our responsibility, right? And that's the purpose of Nala coming and saying that. Nala is from Simba's self, right? So she's from Pride Rock, and Pride Rock is the symbol of Simba's self. And when you have something like that, the self is not logical, right? Like this inner core of what it means to be ourselves, what makes us motivated, what makes us passionate, why do we like what we like, what drives someone to really love being an artist, or for someone to really love being an accountant, or for someone to really, be great at math or be really great at English. Like none of those are really logical frameworks, but at the same time they're there, right? And we don't really understand these things. What drives someone to be incredibly religious, right? Like religion isn't a logical thing. Why would you want to believe in a God that you're not even sure is there, right? That's the whole purpose of the leap of faith. So if you look at someone like Nala, who's a symbol of the self in Pride Rock, this person is not a logical person. So when she says it's your responsibility, she's not trying to make it a logical argument. She's making an emotional argument. And that's what the self is. The self is where our emotions lie. So then Simba tells her, she's like, why not? Why don't you, Nala's like, why are you refusing her call to adventure? And he says, Hakuna Matata. And you can see the look on her face, right? Like, what are you even talking about? And that's really the fight, right? That's the fight between the rationality and the self, right? Like, logically, we could say Hakuna Matata is an incredible strategy, but it's not, right? Because you're not accepting any load, you're not bearing any responsibility, and there's no meaning in your life, right? There's no purpose, there's no reason to wake up in the morning besides a pleasure-filled life versus a meaning-filled life. There's no goal to strive towards. And that's what you see in almost every hero. Every hero has a goal to strive towards, right? Protecting the city. In Simba's case, it's protecting the city. We could see that obviously in Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, all these heroes. That's what they're doing. They're protecting the city. They have some goal that they're constantly trying to maintain. And a big reason why you have an argument between the self and rationality and emotion, right? Rationality and the self is rationality is affected by the ego, right? Because the ego is something that only cares about me. And Simba, at this point, the Hakuna Matata mindset is, don't worry about anything. It's a problem-free philosophy. Don't care about anyone else. Only care about yourself. That's what the ego is all about. But the self is all about responsibility. So responsibility is responsibility for others. Some other thing that is outside of yourself that is greater than yourself. And this, the self, right, the emotional argument that Nala is making is completely devoid of all of the ego. So when she says it is your responsibility, she's really saying put down your ego and commit yourself to something that's greater than yourself, which is Pride Rock. And that's a really powerful thing because she's really saying that within yourself, wow, that's really cool. So she's saying that inside the self is a feeling of responsibility. It's a feeling of oneness with yourself, being completely immersed inside yourself, and that requires helping others, right? It requires doing good deeds for others, right? And being responsible for other people instead of only yourself, only your ego. But then you can see Simba's giving her that face again, right? It's the same exact face. It's this adolescent, rebellious face that doesn't really want to accept any responsibility, only wants to care about pleasure. And that's where she says, it's because of your responsibility. So then she starts to shame him a little bit, right? She says something about Mufasa. She says she compares him to Mufasa and says, you are, man, I don't know, but she compares him to Mufasa, and he gets aggressive, right? And that's interesting because before, Zazu compared Scar to Mufasa, and Scar's obviously, he's very egotistical, right? Like, he's the example of what we think of as someone who's incredibly egotistical, and Scar got aggressive, and now at the same time, Simba is getting aggressive, and you could tell that is because Simba doesn't want to be confronted with the realities of the world. He doesn't want the freedom of information, and that's what Zazu symbolized, and that's what Nala symbolized. Simba is insecure about himself because he doesn't want to be compared to Mufasa, who is better than him. He only wants a yes man. He only wants someone who is going to stroke his ego, but when Nala confronts him, she shames him, and she compares him to Mufasa, exactly what happened with Scar. He gets aggressive, and he doesn't really want to be confronted with the reality that he is not as great as his father. So then he confronts that reality right away, right? He gets away. He goes, he starts talking to himself, and this is the part where he needs to begin to think again, right? And this is the part of not running away from your problems. He realizes, he says, no, you know what? I'm right. Nala's wrong. Starts to get into that sort of mindset. And then he looks at the stars again, and he realizes that he is not the person that he is meant to be, right? He realizes that he needs to sort of, he needs to be a better person, right? He needs to accept his responsibility. And that's where he goes, it's because of me. Right? Like, he's not the person that he wants to be, and it's because of himself. And that's the first step in every single case, actually, right? In every single person who realizes that they need to go and help themselves, they first need to realize that they are not the person that they are meant to be. That is the story of the hero. Throughout the hero's journey, you need to be able to go through some sort of growth. If you look at almost every single case, I'm actually very interested in Kobe Bryant right now. Kobe Bryant, his birth, right? His birth of the hero happened when he was 12 years old. He went to his dad was a professional basketball player, and he was in Italy because his dad played professional in Italy overseas, and he was a big soccer guy. But then Kobe came back after his dad was done being a pro, and he's like, okay, you know what? I want to go and play basketball. He plays basketball, goes to a tournament, and he scored in the entire tournament at 12 years old. Scored 0 points. Had 0 points, not even a free throw in the entire tournament. And he played a decent amount. So he started looking at, okay, you know what do I need to do to get better? He started reading about Michael Jordan. And he found that Michael Jordan, which is also the birth of the hero, same exact story. Michael Jordan got cut from his JV team, or cut from his varsity team, right? He got cut from his varsity team in high school. And that was Michael Jordan's decision. You know what? I'm gonna take that as fuel to be better instead of a rejection to run away from my problems and not have to worry about it and give up on my dreams, right? So Michael Jordan took that rejection and he used it to get better, and that's exactly what happened with Kobe. Kobe spent the entire summer and the rest of his life, actually, the rest of his basketball career, we could say, spending hours a day in the gym, right? He spent that entire summer and he spent the rest of his life, and the birth of his moment saying, I am not the person that I need to be. I scored 0 points in this tournament, and for me to be where I want to be, which is getting drafted, being in the NBA, I need to grow. And this is the point where Simba's at right now. He's saying, for me to be the person that I want to be, I need to accept my hero's journey. I need to grow. And I'm not the person that I want to be. I'm not the person that I want to be right now. And this is what I see as the rebirth, right? This is the next part where he says, you know what? I accept this is my fault, and I need to become a hero. So, he shames himself, looks up at the stars, right? And he really starts to begin to internalize this sort of shame. So, we've seen this across all of these trials, right? What comes next after the getting in touch with himself, right? And that's what ends up happening, right? What ends up happening is the self comes back. Rafiki comes back around because he realizes that he's getting more in touch with himself, right? Like, now he's starting to do the introspective process. He's stopping himself from running away from his problems, and he's ready for this initiation process, which is about to happen, which I absolutely love. So this is where Rafiki comes in. First, you see him looking at so he's ready to get into his initiation, and what does that revolve around? This is him looking into his own reflection, right? He's becoming more aware of himself. He's becoming more self-aware, and he's looking and that's symbolized by him looking into his own reflection, right? Like, instead of him projecting himself and not really caring about the world, now he's starting to be a little bit more self-aware. So you can see that Rafiki starts to call out to him, and this is the meeting of the mentor. This is him actually, it's weird because usually the mentor isn't the self. That's not a very, right? You could see this in sort of Star Wars, for example, when you have, no, actually, I guess Obi-Wan was the self. Yeah, so never mind that. So he goes to meet Rafiki, who is Now it's his goal, right? He's getting in touch with himself. That's really what he's going for. And I think the best part about this, they did this so incredibly well. He starts speaking in a different language. Asante sana squash banana. Like, what does that even mean? And you could see that, this is where Simba's like, what is going on? Like, who is this annoying guy who's speaking in a different language? But that's exactly what the self is, right? It's a symbolism. It's an imagery of the even deeper part of the self, the even deeper part of the unconscious self that we've yet understood to realize. Why do we have our passions? Why do we have our motivations? Like, what is the reasoning behind that? What is the emotions that we have yet to understand? They are illogical. They sound exactly like Rafiki is talking right now. Asante sana squash banana. What the hell is this? It is completely irrational. It is completely illogical. But that is the thing. It is meant to be. So that is exactly what Nala was doing. She was speaking with an illogical argument, and that's exactly what Rafiki is doing. He's speaking in an illogical argument. He can't even be understood. And that is what the self is meant to be. It is this emotions that we haven't even understood, that we can't even tap into, yet they are so important to the way that we actually orient ourselves. So, what is the first reaction to this? Simba has an incredible reaction. It's like, this is the crazy little, he says, calls him a creepy little monkey, will you stop following me, right? Like, that's exactly what it is, right? You meet this person that is completely speaking illogically. If you've been acting logically the entire time, obviously you're going to be so confused when you meet this this illogical figure of the self. So, Rafiki begins to speak to him, and he speaks to him in a language that could be a little bit more understood, but he's speaking to him in this, it's still illogical, but it's self-reflective, and that's what Simba really needs right now. He says, you don't really know who you are. And Simba comes back and he says, I suppose you know. And Rafiki, being the self, being the inner part of him that is so internalized, right? Like, this is him, right? Like, Rafiki is a symbol of him. When he says, oh, and I suppose you know, of course Rafiki, the self, is going to say, I do know. He says, you are your father's boy, right? Like, you are Mufasa's boy. And you could see Simba is absolutely shocked by this. I think they did this face so well, right? Like, he is beyond shocked by this. He knows that he's encountered somebody that is sort of metaphysical, right? Like, he's having this realization that is not logical. How the hell does this guy know who I am? But he knows exactly who I am, right? So then what he does is he meets him, and obviously when we think of the image of the self, the illogical part of us, and I brought this up before, it is the meditating person, right? It is the spiritual aspect of us, right? Why do we pray? Why do Buddhists, why do the Eastern religions, why do they meditate? Like, what is the reasoning behind it? And everyone says it's to get in touch with yourself. It's to get in touch with your emotions. And that's exactly what Rafiki is symbolizing here, right? Like, he's so in touch with himself that he's meditating. He's so spiritually in tune with himself. Actually, Joseph Campbell says this so well, and I think this is the analogy that he used for this is, first he said that we are in that consciousness, right? The conscious self that we are experiencing, this feeling of rationality, it is not our true selves. It is, he described it as a second form of consciousness. This brain is only our first self. It's the part of us that we decide to operate on. It's the consciousness that we choose to operate on, but it's not the deeper sense of consciousness. There's another sense of consciousness that lies within us, and it is the unity between us. It is the emergence of the self and this spiritual aspect of us. And you might not even say it in a religious aspect, but just the fact that we have a spirit, that is really us getting in tune with ourselves, and that's the consciousness that Joseph Campbell believes that we should run on. And And actually, so yeah, there's a if you want to go back, there's a biological explanation to this. First, there was a saying from Joseph Campbell that I really wanted to bring up. It's a saying. He says that we are a consciousness is like, it's like you're standing on a whale fishing for minnows. Yeah. You're standing on a whale fishing for minnows. So you're standing on this whale who is eating all the minnows, but you're still standing on him trying to grab, you're trying to grab a little bit of the food. When the self, like this really unknown, the whale is the symbol of the deepest part of yourself, the unconscious, mystical, dangerous, deep part of yourself. If you get in touch with that whale inside of you that lives inside of you, the self, then you will be getting all the fish, right? And that's it's a symbol of, the fish would be a symbol of fulfillment, right? Like, you get more fulfillment if you're in touch with yourself rather than if you're just trying to get a little fish that the whale did not get itself. So there's a biological explanation for this second consciousness, and I thought this was really important. Simon Sinek brought it up in his lecture on Start With Why, on his book Start With Why. And if you think about it, our brain, right, like, if you say that we have evolved from other animals, right, other animals, it's not like we developed a completely new brain to make us, to develop this sort of consciousness, right? Like, we wouldn't say a deer is conscious. We wouldn't say a dog is conscious in the way that we are, and the fact that we could speak, we could think, we have all these added features. The thing is, our brain actually evolved by adding on top of our other brain. So we still have this inner brain, it's called the limbic system, these primal urges that we have, this is really the self, right? It's the inner part of our brain. And what ended up happening is we developed the prefrontal cortex of, rationality and thinking and all these things, but they developed on top of the brain, on top of this inner brain. And what Simon Sinek says, and this is the belief of the biological explanation for the self, is the self, this emotional, irrational side of you, the part of you that literally exists within dogs, is the foundation for your brain. It's the inner part of your brain. It's the self, right? And when you connect that dog part of you, that that inner brain, with the rationality part of yourself, that is the deeper consciousness. That is the whale. But only if you want to use the logical, rational side of you, the ego, which is this outer layer of your brain. You're not getting in touch with the inner part of yourself, which is the inner limbic brain, which is the symbolization of the whale. I find that to be incredibly powerful. So next we are moving on to the initiation ceremony, and I think we just hit a minute 2, so I'm going to stop it there, and I'm going to do the next lecture on this, and now I'm going to go for 3 lectures. But Simba needs to be initiated with the self. He needs to go through his initiation ceremony. He has to go deeper into his self, and I'm going to do that next week. So I look forward to that, and I hope you enjoyed.